It is my absolute pleasure to welcome to the floor the Heritage Council of WA's Chair, Darren Foster. And a little bit about Darren. He became a member of the Heritage Council in June 2023, and is the current chair. Darren has more than 30 years' experience in strategic leadership across all three tiers of government and wealth of knowledge in governance, sustainable development, Aboriginal economic and social development, environmental policy and regulation. With a keen interest in WA's history and heritage, Darren has academic qualifications in local history and has produced oral histories and biographical papers that capture the diverse stories of WA. Darren envisions the council playing a key role in elevating the profile of Western Australians' cultural heritage and sharing the stories behind our diverse buildings, people and places that have shaped our community as we head towards Western Australia's 2029 milestone. Please put your hands together for Darren Foster.
Thank you very much. And I'm not going to stand up here alone. I'm going to ask the Heritage Council members to come up as well, please. So the purpose of this session is just to, be a little bit accountable to our peers in the history and heritage space, and see what questions you might have of us, what we're doing as a Heritage Council, what our priorities are, how we're thinking about 2029, and what we're doing to sort of try and lift the profile of history and heritage across the community. So I really wanted to see if anyone here has any questions, and we'll probably do this at each of our conferences every year, just 30 minutes to put us on the mat, so to speak. And if I can't handle the question...
Thank you, and great idea to have an opportunity like this. Mine refers to 2029. And I wonder if you've considered the aspect of railways within those various activities that might take place in 2029, given that railways are particularly deficient as a thing in the Heritage Register. I also acknowledge that whilst railways were key in the development of modern Western Australia, they actually had a very significant impact on Aboriginal country and the lives of Aboriginal people. And I wondered if you're aware even of the excellent project that's been happening for the last 3 or 4 years, doing research into Noongar people and railways that investigates and reflects on what their opinions of that time were, as well as looking at what's proved to be an ongoing, all the way through the 20th century and beyond, relationship between Aboriginal people and railways.
Thanks. So I might just break that question down into a few parts. One is about the importance of railways for, commemorating in 2029 the history of this state. And then I'll talk about the way we approach registration of places and what our current priorities are, and that might give you the broader context. So in terms of 2029, the state has a planning committee for 2029. It only started late last year. I'm a member of it, representing the Heritage Council. Lottery West is on it. Office of Multicultural Interests, Culture and the Arts is on it. And it's supported by the Department of Premier and Cabinet. And just recently, Reconciliation WA has been brought onto the group, as well as Yuriyakan Theatre Company and the Community Arts Network. So, and the committee is chaired by Davina D'Anna, who's the Parliamentary Secretary to the Premier and member for Kimberley. So right now, the committee's been involved in settling the key sort of objectives, which I think when they're announced, I think you'll be pretty comfortable with them. They obviously recognise the ancient Aboriginal history we have here, but it also recognises the diversity of our population, non-English speaking migrants that had a big impact on WA and its economy and society. It it creates room for a whole lot of diverse narratives. And interestingly, only last week I circulated to committee members a list of anniversaries between now and 2029 to sort of make the point that you can't just sort of get to 2029 and say, ta-da, we're here, start the fireworks. You need to actually build up to it and tell the stories on the way. And you need to think about beyond 2029, because 2029, after all, is really only relevant to Perth, Boorloo. And if you want to use that date as a pretext for a wider commemoration and understanding of WA's history, noting Albany started it in 1826, Cocos Islands around that same time. So there's a whole string of different dates. So there's a lot of arbitrariness about 2029 as a date, but you need to sort of use that date as a way of building social unity and social cohesion about the incredible stories of WA, including the First Nations stories. And I think some of those infrastructure pushes, the railways that were built, I'm aware of some of the, how instrumental they were to some of the development of the agricultural regions, for instance, how important they were to getting all those, I think 1,000 miners were arriving, 1,000 prospective miners were arriving each week in Fremantle, needing to get to the goldfields. How important those that rail infrastructure was for the development of the state. So in terms of how we approach the registration of places, there's just short of 1,400 places on the state register, and we've got a fairly elaborate process for assessing places and whether they should go on the state register. And places can mean a whole range of things. It doesn't have to be a building. It can include infrastructure. It can include massacre sites, for instance. There's a whole string of things. There's a lot of, and we, by the way, have about 600 places that we call the backlog, which is 600 places we're yet to process and go through and determine if they meet the criteria to be on the state register. So 1,400 already on the list, and another 600 we need to work through. So that pile of assessments will take us about the next 150 years to get through. So we've got to make some choices, and the choices we made was based on an assessment of the register that was done by a previous council that identified a whole lot of thematic gaps in the register. So there are a lot of underrepresented places. We certainly don't need any more churches on the register because there's more than enough of those, but there are gaps in a whole lot of thematic areas like mining related. And we have settled on a set of priorities for the next few years to try and sort of close some of those gaps in the lead up to 2029. And that includes Aboriginal people and places. Now, we're very careful to understand that we've got limitations in that area because there is another act called the Aboriginal Cultural Heritage Act. So anything that is of spiritual and cultural importance exclusively, that's not something that we can deal with under our act. It's a specific exclusion. But there are other places that are relevant to Aboriginal people that don't qualify under the other act. For instance, the Coolbaroo Club, which was a really important social club for Aboriginal people in Perth, which was outside the red line that was where Aboriginal people were forbidden to cross in the Perth Business District. The Coolbaroo Club sites are the sort of thing that we could list on the state register. So we've identified Aboriginal people and places, places relevant to non-English speaking migrants, places relevant to workers, and places relevant to women as our priorities for the next few years. So that's what we're focusing on. So we've just recognised and registered the Silver Chain headquarters in Highgate. Who knew Silver Chain started in WA? Incredible. And that leans into the women theme. We're looking at a whole series of places that relate to those themes, and that's what we're focusing on. Just to give you an idea of the throughput, that is the number of places we manage to put on the list every year. It's probably 4 in a good year, maybe a little more depending on how much research is required and so on. One of the challenges with the Heritage Act, and I think this goes very much to the DNA of heritage laws in WA. 35 years we've had heritage laws this year. That's about 15 years behind Victoria. So WA was pretty late to the party in terms of having I've got an echo. So we're pretty late to the party in having heritage protection in WA. And one of the reasons for that was it was very hard to get the legislation through the state parliament. So there were about 3 or 4 attempts to get the laws through the upper house. The upper house rebuffed and resisted because they were concerned about the impact on private property rights. So that's very much built into the DNA of the legislation. So if we do an assessment of a place, we have to consult every single landowner impacted by that listing. So you can imagine what a railway line would involve. We've had Bibbulmun Track just go on our to-do list. And can you imagine, and that's a very worthy proposition as well, but can you imagine how many landowners we're going to have to consult, state, local government, private, in order to get that listing to a point where we can make a recommendation to the minister. So the fact that we've got to go and ask the minister or recommend to the minister the registration of a place really means there's a lot of onus on the council to make sure we've brought along the owners and the owners are comfortable, because you really don't want to go to a minister and say, look, we've got a place we want to list, but there's a whole heap of objections from the owners, because the minister's going to then think twice about whether it's worth registering it. And that has happened before. There's a couple of examples I'm aware of where past ministers have decided not to register a place because there's been a bad reaction from the owners. Obviously, when you register a heritage place, you put a memorial on the title. So that worries some owners. Does that mean red tape? They have to then, if there's any development proposal or anything that impacts on the heritage place, they have to refer it to the Heritage Council. So it's not as though we're saying, look, here's a pile of cash, we can help you with restoration and look after your place. I mean, it's potentially perceived as an impost or a burden or somehow infringing their rights. So we've got to be quite careful about how we navigate those issues. And which is why we're making some choices now about the places we're going to recognise and where we're going to focus our limited resources for the next few years to make sure by 2029 we have a more representative register than we currently have. But to your point, it's probably going to take decades to get the register more representative and reflective of contemporary expectations, because there was a lot of concentration obviously on colonial buildings, on churches and that sort of thing in the past, although we do have a skate park on the register, which is pretty novel. The second skate park in the world was built in WA, so how about that? So we know the register's imperfect, it's a work in progress, and it takes a long time. But yes, we recognise the importance of those things. But look, being on the register is not the be-all and end-all either. There's a lot of important places that aren't on the register, and not everything could go on the register because we're trying to pick the best of or representative examples. I think the important thing is to tell the stories and educate the public about the importance of valuing our history and heritage, because that way, it'll mobilise support, it'll mobilise investment and funding. So we're very keen to sort of lift the profile overall, and we've got a number of techniques for doing that, but it's not always about, going on the register, because just getting on the register doesn't mean funds are going to start flowing or, there's necessarily any particular benefit. So.
Just so the folks online can hear, we've got quite a few questions coming through on the platform. So we're gonna do these in quick succession if that works for you, Darren. Now, there was a question from the floor before I go to the questions on the platform. Just one from the floor, then I'll go to the platform for a few. Thanks.
Hello, everybody. My name's Natalie Evans from the Australian Museums and Galleries Association. Thank you for your explanation of how your assessment process works, and I'm delighted to hear that the silver chain has been added to the register. I'm going to ask you a question about collections, naturally, and I'm interested to know to what extent, if any, the significance of the collection plays into the heritage assessment of the site, and whether the collections are ever considered part of the site in the assessment.
I might have to actually take that one on notice. I'm sure we've got several criteria by which we determine whether a site reaches a threshold to go on the state register. And obviously, if it's got some, scientific or technical, if there's something exceptional about it from that perspective, and that might imply then the collections there might be relevant to that assessment. In that case, I can see where the collections would actually be part of that evaluation. But I can't think of any immediate examples off the top of my head.
Hi, I'm Flavia. So it depends on the assessment you prepare. So if during the assessment that collection comes through, it will get into the report that goes along with the listing. So I will use a National Trust example here, since I can see a lot of National Trust people here. Wonnerup House has a significant collection, and that is included on the Conservation Management Plan, the importance of that collection. So that assists with the protection of that beautiful and well I think collection. Sorry, that to continue on the place and to continue to be referenced. I think the most important is the research you do that goes behind the listing, and yes, so there are a couple of listings that includes collections.
Thank you. And before I go to the next question on the platform, someone did ask a question of who are these amazing people on the council with you? So I'm going to go across the line. If you could introduce yourself, please.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Lee Barrett. I'm the Deputy Chair and I'm the Coordinator of Heritage at the City of Gosnells.
Thanks, Lee.
Kyle Jevons. I'm a Director at Human Urban. We're a development company but have done a lot of work in adaptive reuse of buildings.
You?
Hi, I'm Flavia Kieperman. I'm a heritage architect and I lead a consultancy firm on heritage.
Thank you.
Richard Offen, general layabout, really.
I'm sure you do more than that. Thank you.
Martin Silk. I'm a heritage structural engineer and I run a small practice in close to Fremantle.
Thank you.
Hi, Gillian Collard, Senior Manager, Aboriginal Engagement and Partnerships with Department of Water and Environmental Regulation.
Thank you.
Yeah, my name's Graham Gammy. I've just got a long-term background working in the heritage space from a government perspective.
Wow, what a great cachet of people on the council. Thank you all. So I'll just go to the first question from the platform. Many of the planning policies across WA have been redrafted in recent years. What, if any, actions are you undertaking to embed archaeological assessments as a practice into these policies? Fremantle have it, City of Perth does not. And we can do it in a minute. So we've got time for another few questions.
Well, we don't necessarily get a look at the policies that local governments might have, but when we condition projects, we can require, archaeological actions to be taken. So that's something we do. In terms of development proposals more broadly, if there's a development that's going to impact on or potentially impact on a heritage place, it must be referred to the Heritage Council so we can give advice to the decision makers, whoever they might be, whether it's local government or WA Planning Commission or someone else. So we have that buy-in, but we tend not to see policies of local governments as a rule. Yeah.
Thank you. And next question, are you taking the experience of Albany 2026 into the planning of 2029 for here?
Well, I can't speak for others on the committee, but yes, I am. I think the art of 2029 is to make sure that we've got a balance of events, but then other things that are going to last, because if we put all our eggs in the events basket, there's not going to be much to show for it after 2029. So we've got to do things like invest in digitisation. We've got to try and sort of make some of our historical records much more accessible than they currently are. We've got to do something about Aboriginal languages and properly supporting the work that people like Sue does. We've got to invest in truth-telling so we can better understand the impact of colonisation on Aboriginal people and their experience. We've got to do more on the education front to make sure people understand the incredible rich and diverse history we have. And we've actually got to look after the buildings that we've got that are in states of repair, shall I say. So, yeah, they're all the sort of things that we're thinking about in the planning for 2029. Ultimately, government will make decisions based on the advice they're given, and hopefully there'll be funding behind that, fingers crossed. So we'll see how it all pans out in the next couple of years.
Thank you. We'll take one more question from the platform here, then I'll come back to the floor. The Heritage Council has a statutory role in identifying and protecting places of cultural heritage significance across WA, but heritage protection and truth-telling are not the same thing. Can you speak to what the Heritage Council is actively doing beyond protection of the physical record to support the telling of Aboriginal history on Aboriginal terms, and who is leading that work?
So again, I just go back to the we've got a separation in the acts. So the Aboriginal Cultural Heritage Act and then the Heritage Act that we administer, they're quite distinct. But we think there's space where we can better recognise Aboriginal places. So that's the first thing we're doing. We're actually trying to make sure places like Garlup Lake Munga are recognised, which was a massacre site. Coolbrew Club, WA Aboriginal Media Association, there are a range of sites we're looking at. Dog Rock is another one we're keen to look at because that's got an incredible set of Aboriginal stories behind it. But in a practical sense, one of the things we've done is launch a new heritage plaque, and we worked with a group called Danju Cooling on that, and Richard Wally, the respected Noongar elder, collaborated with us on the design of the plaque. So there's an Aboriginal design around the margins of it. The plaque goes on heritage places, acknowledges the Aboriginal country that the place is on. It has a QR code so that we can have more information behind the plaque about the Aboriginal history of the site, as well as any other relevant information. And this has only been launched about a month or 6 weeks ago, and you'll start seeing them pop up around the state. Blue plaques, they're very distinctive and bright and attention-grabbing, quite deliberately. And, you know, you'll be able to use your iPhone to get that extra history behind them. So that's one thing that we're doing within our remit and resources to try and achieve a more balanced and comprehensive story about the history of WA and its diversity. There's also a Sites of Truth-Telling project running in the Department of Planning, Lands and Heritage, and we're working with that team to identify places that are of importance to Aboriginal people that we can then try and incorporate onto our register. So there's a range of things being done.
Great to hear. I'm going to just swap this mic out for yours because that one needs a battery change, and we'll take a question from the floor. Just one moment.
Yeah, hi. When is the Heritage Council thinking of putting their below threshold assessments up for people to see? Because there were so many of those that were done. The Register Committee before it was abolished in 2019, looked at a whole lot of places that were considered to be below threshold, and of course the Heritage Council did as well. That's a lot of valuable work there that could be of use to heritage researchers out in the state. Thank you.
I agree. There's no shortage of information when we assess a place, and as you've pointed out, quite well on occasion, the decision is that it doesn't meet the threshold. But there's yes, okay, you know more than me on that, but yes, there's a wealth of information there. We'll have a think about that because I suspect that's probably in databases in the department somewhere, but it's not readily accessible to the public. Although I'm sure if anyone approached the department or the Heritage Council, we'd make it available. But I think we need a more systemic solution to make sure that material's more broadly available. So we'll try and find out what the best way to do that is. But that's a good point. Thank you.
We'll just take one more question.
Hi, I'm Nonya Peters. I'm involved in the migrant history in West Australia and in Northern, definitely, with the Northern Army Camp Heritage Association. But I've done some heritage studies on the military camps that were used for migrants. And for instance, TAFE College was the Holden camp, although the Army camp itself is still in use, so that makes it different. But what happens after we've done that study? There's nothing up there. The one I did on the Greylands camp, there's nothing there to show that this site was there, that anything happened there. In Northern, on the Great Eastern Highway, there used to be a huge tent city. We called it Calico City. How are we going to identify those sites? What can be done, and who's responsible for putting up the site? I mean, we can't just go in as a community group and stick a sign up.
So if the site is on the state register, then we've got capacity to put a plaque and some recognition. If it's on a local register, that is at the local government level, then local government can do that. That's their domain. But I think this goes to the broader point that, as I said, I think it's not just about everything being on the State Register of Heritage Places. We've actually got to popularise the stories, and I think we've got to tell the stories about the place, not the other way around, to capture a new audience and get people much more engaged in our history and heritage. Yeah, and we all are, and we're doing it as well. Absolutely. Well, that's already on the radar. That's well understood by the Bicentennial Committee. So 400 years in 2029 of the Batavia wreck. So, and I think one of the important ways of actually telling a much more rich and diverse story about WA, deep Aboriginal history, is also to talk about the Dutch and French exploration, because that's, I think, known but not perhaps fully understood, the extent of that. And that deconstructs a little bit the focus on 1829 as the point where everything started. We know that's not the case. So 1979, for those of you who can remember that the events around 1979, there were lots of parades and floats and reenactments and all of that sort of thing, because it was all about the arrival of Stirling. But of course, the history of WA is much more complex and interesting than that particular event. So we've got to release a lot more of these diverse stories through a variety of means, whether it's interpretation. I think we've actually got to put a lot of time and effort into social media as well, because we've got to get a younger generation engaged in these stories. So there's some of the things we're thinking about at the Heritage Council, but also in the context of planning for 2029, we're thinking along the same lines. I'd like to see the Dutch King come out for 2029. I think that would be pretty neat. And we could have, WA Goes Dutch for a month or something and, tell an interesting story. Yes, we'll be the orange people for a month, yeah.
Darren Foster and the Heritage Council of WA, thank you so much. Please give them a warm thank you.